Hi everyone! In this video we're going to be covering a really basic recipe for cranberry white chocolate scones. This is going to be using the biscuit method, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of things you can play around with in terms of ingredients and which ones you need to leave the same or at least make a very similar substitution for. So the first thing is going to be to get 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and that needs to be that type of flour, 2 tablespoons of butter that's cold, and 2 tablespoons of shortening. In addition to that, you want 4 teaspoons of baking powder, not baking soda, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/3 of a cup of sugar, and this is just an addition for scones, even though we're using the biscuit method, and then a cup of half and half for eggnog. You want to use something that's a little bit thicker than whole milk. And then you can use 1 egg as well, that's going to add a little bit of richness to it, and then half a cup each of dried cranberries and white chocolate chips, and those you can sub out for things like raisins or other types of chocolate chips. So the first thing you're going to do is add your flour, your baking powder, your salt, and your sugar to your bowl. And this is a 1 bowl method, but you have a very regimented order of steps. So add all those dry ingredients in, and then you want to mix those up really well so that when you add your liquid, you don't have to mix it quite as long. So you're just going to mix those up and get them all integrated so that everything is kind of uniform throughout. And this is going to keep the mixing to a minimum later on. So then you're going to take your butter and shortening, and your butter needs to be kind of cut up into little cubes, and you're going to add that to the dry ingredients, and you do want your butter to be pretty cold, and it's not going to hurt to put the shortening in the fridge too. And then what you're going to do is just start working that into the dry ingredients, and you want it to end up looking like cornmeal and breadcrumbs. And there's a couple different ways of doing that. You can kind of work it with your fingers, or you can take your palms like you see me doing and rubbing those together. But the final product should look like breadcrumbs or cornmeal. You could also use a fork or a pastry blender instead of your fingers, but I like using my fingers because they're a little easier to wash. But you just keep on working all of that in, and you're just kind of mushing it together until all of it looks uniform. This process is called cutting in, and it's pretty much the main element of the biscuit method. It's the one thing that makes it stand out from other methods, and this is what's going to give you that nice flaky crust of a pie crust, or the flaky biscuits and things that everybody loves. So as you can see, we're continuing to work this in. It does take a little bit of time, so just make sure that you are making sure there's no big butter chunks or shortening chunks in there. So the next step is going to be to add your egg into your other liquid, which could be half and half or whole milk or eggnog. I use eggnog just to add a little bit of a holiday twist, and it makes it taste really, really good. That's something that's really fun to do if you're making like a Christmas breakfast. So then you're going to add the liquid to the dry ingredients, and you want to mix it together until it just barely comes together. And you might still have like a little bit of a shaggy mess, and you might still have like a little bit of flour on the edges, but we just want to mix it until it barely comes together. And then when it's just about there, you're going to add your cranberries and your chocolate chips in there. And the reason we don't want to mix this a ton is we don't want tough biscuits, we don't want tough scones, and so you just barely mix that until it comes together so that that gluten doesn't develop and make it super tough. The more you work this, the tougher it's going to be, so you really, really want to minimize that mixing. So once it just barely comes together and it looks good and all the cranberries and everything are mixed in well, you're going to turn that onto a parchment lined pan, and I put a little bit of flour down as well, and just put it all in one big blob in the middle, and then I put a little bit of flour on top to pat it out into a circle. And this is the traditional way of making scones. You're going to score that into 8 different pieces before you bake it, just so you kind of know when it's done how to cut it. But you just score that into 8 pieces, and then you're going to bake it at 400 for about 12 to 15 minutes until it gets golden brown. And even though these amounts are listed, the amounts of time go until it looks golden brown. You can also brush it with cream and sprinkle it with sanding sugar, the kind of chunky sugar, and that's going to make like a really nice crunchy top on top of it. So you're going to cut it when it comes out of the oven where the lines are scored, because you probably will have to cut through that again, but you've got your guide that you started out with in the beginning, and so that's pretty easy. So these scones end up being absolutely amazing. I tried it out with the eggnog, and honestly, it was literally just because that was all I had in my fridge at that point in time. and it worked out absolutely perfectly, and it's definitely something I'll repeat again. Let me know in the comments if you decide to try it. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And right now, subscribing is the best way to help out our channel.